welcome to another episode of the Best Book Club. I'm your host, Nu Fatora, and this is the podcast where I discuss the best stories with the best minds in the community. On this episode, I have the extremely distinct pleasure of conversing with not only Hans Gutherson, but also NicelyDone, one of the biggest inspirations to me in this community and who I consider to be the greatest writer we've ever seen. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you very much. I thank you for all that you just said, but you know, I stay humble. I don't think I'm the best at writing or anything, so there's just a lot to learn still.
Of course,
We'll
of
think
course.
it for you, so you don't have to worry.
Ah,
Yeah, well, we're your fan club, so you don't have to worry about that kind of thing. So really, I want to
right.
get this out of the way at the beginning, so it's not consuming the entire episode. I am so excited to talk with you. Hans began his interview with you with this passage. When I was younger, before I ever started writing wedgie stories, there were a few writers who inspired me more than any others. The list, in no particular order, goes Auntie Cherry, Cosby Rerun, and NicelyDone. All three of those talented writers are the authorial equivalent of atomic wedgies, not often seen, but always perfect. And I feel exactly the same way, though on my Mount Rushmore of writers in this community, I have Auntie Cherry, Hans Gutherson, Saseda, and you.
That's very nice. I must admit. I I will say that back whenever I was first writing this stuff, I honestly didn't think people were that interested, to be honest with you, just
Mm.
based on lack of feedback and just I don't know, just looking at the metrics of things really kind of screws with you creatively sometimes. And I
Yeah.
think I just kind of lost that passion. But you know what? I'm starting it up again, kind of. So
Yes, and
there you go.
we're super excited. Um, Hans and I dove very deeply into how big of an inspiration and influence you've been on us in the episodes on Feeling the Fire and Blood Money. So I won't retread that ground too much, but
Oh,
seriously, there is so much about your work that's influenced how I write and what I enjoy in this community. From titles not having the word wedgie in them and meaning so much in relation to the story to understanding how important a good build up to that first wedgie is to revealing how insanely better a story can be when you have indirect detail and lots of it. I mean, this list is probably just as long as why I love Lucy and Daniela so much. And thank you for what you've given us.
Oh, you're welcome. I
yay.
think
We need an
I think
applause button.
really. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's
We don't
no
have an applause button here. I'm sorry.
no, not that high level.
um, but really kind of one of the things I was thinking about whenever I was listening to you guys and you guys were talking about writing styles and everything. That was really why I even started writing wedgie stories is because I didn't like how other people were going about it way back then, to
Mhm.
Yeah.
be honest. I was like, this is just like I liked the concepts they had and everything, but the delivery a lot of the times was just not interesting to me and I'd just get really bored
Hmm.
because looking back, I think it was just because it was kind of early and all that. But a lot of people had like this play script kind of going on, if you know what I'm talking about, where it's like one person talks, you might have like a little bit of description, then another person talks, and then it's just kind of like reading out a play, literally. And that
Hmm.
just was not anything I liked personally.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on so many of those old stories.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I was like, you know what? I think I'm okay at writing, so I'll just try this out. And I was enjoying it for a while, so I still do. But just the motivation sometimes to actually sit down and write for hours on end kind of gets me. But
Yeah.
I guess it's easier for you to make art. I guess in some ways.
yes, because well, money for one thing, but
Yeah. Yes.
secondly, I think there's just a bigger market for it. To be honest with you, not even saying monetization or anything. I just think that there's just this immediate like I'm gonna grow if I start doing this, and I might be able to take it to somewhere else instead of this, just kind of posting for my own pleasure or whatever. Maybe actually
Sure.
reach a bigger audience. So
Mhm. That's
Yeah.
definitely seems to be the case. I mean, you're at over 2,000 watchers right now, and so it. I think you're pretty right on the money there.
Hmm.
yeah, but I still want to get more, a lot more followers because I mean, I like the number. I think it's great. I've been growing a lot more even recently,
Hmm.
but I think there's obviously a lot bigger content creators out there than me that do just specifically wedgies. So there's
Hmm.
always room to grow.
Of course,
Sure.
and I think that's a mark of a great writer, just in general, not even in this community, is one who's looking to continuously improve and recognizes that they're not at their best.
Right. What was funny whenever I was listening to you guys talk about my stories was I went back and read some of it, and I have to admit I was cringing really hard at some of the things that I wrote. I was like, did I seriously? I think the main
Uh,
thing, I don't know if you have like other parts that you want to talk about or anything. Hopefully I don't take away from it, but the main thing is whenever I was looking back, I really loved analogies like a little bit too much in the fact that it
hmm.
would be like an analogy or a metaphor or whatever, and then it would be just like one more sentence and then be another like metaphor, and I was like, this is too much. This is too much for anyone. I still really like analogies because I think, going through school and learning more about, writing and all that, analogies and metaphors are really important. But
Mhm.
having too many of them just kind of is like, what am I even what am I reading about anymore? It seems so off track.
Mhm.
So that was the main thing I got whenever I was reading
Okay.
old stories. But
Yeah,
that
it's
and that and oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, you're
Good.
fine.
What
You're
were you gonna
fine.
say?
Like, and
Um.
however it goes, however this conversation goes is perfectly fine with me, really.
Okay.
Um,
I don't want to just be the one stealing the show if you guys have questions
it's
in
well,
between. But
you're the star today, honestly. That's
thank you.
um,
But
but yeah,
the
it's
main thing. Oh, go ahead.
oh,
Go
yeah.
The
So
main thing that I want to say before I forget, really, I
mhm,
think is what it is. You guys were talking about the ending to which one is that?
blood money.
Yes, and how
Hmm.
you didn't
Oh
like it.
yeah.
And I think that is another thing. Just staying on the whole growing as a writer and everything.
Yeah.
That not having a good ending and not tying things together, I think, is a very obvious sign of being a younger writer, and not younger like physically, but just not knowing what you're doing, is that you don't think about how these relationships actually tie in together in between scenes and all that, even what isn't being written. How are they feeling and all that. So
Mm.
just reading more and just learning more about, art and all that, it just becomes obvious that hey, this doesn't really make sense with these characters because the whole time there's no setup or anything. So yeah, I totally agree with what you guys were saying on that.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
imagine we'll get to this, but I'm curious. Just reading like the most recent chapter you just put out, which was awesome. Looking at that and looking back at some of the stuff you've written in the past, how do you feel like you've grown, like as a person? Like you mentioned, having read more and things. I'm just curious, like if there's things you care about that are different from like that 10 years ago version of yourself who was writing.
In just literature or what do you
Like
mean
in general,
specifically?
like you mentioned having read more, but beyond that too, like do you feel like you're a very different person from like 10 years ago?
For sure, I I am because just looking back at some of the things I was obviously into because I was writing it and just how I was writing it, I think all that has changed a lot. I mean, my writing style is still, my writing style. I don't think that's ever going to go away. But just some of the topics I was bringing up, it's just like you guys were talking about the whole incest angle and all that. I think that whenever you're writing um erotica or however you want to say it, if you're new at it, you think, I'm just gonna throw the whole kitchen sink at it, everything I like.
Mhm.
And that's not necessarily great because then there's just a lot of flaws in it. So
Yeah, but being able to recognize how not only how you've grown, but the I guess it's not a full thought, but I guess being able to recognize how you've grown and your previous shortcomings that are now you've overcome them. I think that's very it's a very good thing to be able to come to, or a good realization.
yeah, I agree. I think you just constantly have to think back to even what you just like wrote or drew or whatever and think, how could this be better? Just
Mhm.
not even necessarily like nitpicking too much, but just thinking, well, I could have done this, I could have done that. Like just more broader strokes, I think is really how you start thinking about the future that you're going to create for art.
Definitely.
Was it hard for you getting back into writing after like 10 years from the story? Well, I mean, I guess after we chatted, right, a couple of years ago, you wrote the birthday present, right?
Right.
But like, have you been writing much since then, or was it hard sort of getting back into it?
Nothing, erotic related, but I definitely
Mm-hmm.
have written a lot in the meantime and just studied, different writing and just reading is just,
Mhm.
I think that's a big thing is I like while I was doing art, a lot of times I was just, listening to audiobooks in the background and
Mhm.
just hearing the different ways people set up. Just I think setting up was always my major weakness back then, and I still think it's difficult, but just thinking ahead is a big part, I've realized.
Mhm. Well, it's kind of funny that you say that because I think your setup is some of the best that we've ever gotten.
Are you
While
someone who
I
outlines though? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm just
No, no,
curious now
no.
when you talk about setup, if like outlining is part of your process or if it just comes to you.
Really depends on if I don't know, like I was saying before, like character relationships, how those will go, how like a scene will go, like into the next and all that. I think that's important if you can't think of that on the spot. And also, it's just good practice to do it even if you're like, I think I know where this is going, but then you step back and you're like, yeah, that's just not gonna work later down the line. I
Mhm.
didn't do an outline for this newest one because I already had such a concrete idea of the character relationships I wanted, so I didn't
Mm.
this time.
Okay. Interesting. So you're saying your process has evolved in some ways.
Right.
Okay. I'm curious about how you got into writing in the first place. It sounds like you do external writing away from the community that's not really involved with that.
Well, I think it all comes down to being imaginative and having a way too overactive imagination is really
Mm.
the problem. Like whenever I was younger, like way younger, like child playing in the yard kind of thing, I would just I think most kids that don't think of these kind of things, they just play and they're like, "Oh, this is happening today or whatever." No, I was like constantly had this storyline that I was creating whenever I was, doing anything. So I think that's where it came from and like my earliest things I was writing was about what I was, playing
Mm.
outside of writing.
Okay. That's really interesting because I've done a little bit of that as well. I still remember very vividly doing just playing like crazy imaginative worlds and then
Right.
writing stupid little stories about it. But then
Yeah.
with that foundation, tr- uh, continuing on and then becoming better. Um,
Right.
So 5 years passed between three in 2014 to the birthday present in 2019. And now 3 years more have passed since the birthday present and the new adventure in 2019 to now. And I'm curious if there's any if there's a reason behind these interludes.
Well, first, I will say that whenever I look back at how long ago the feeling the fire until it burns and all that, I immediately was depressed because I was like, how why am I getting old? But secondly, to what you were saying, I think it goes back to I didn't exactly feel that uh interested in writing that much because like I know you both were giving me feedback and a couple other people
Sure.
on the forum, but the overall just feeling of, well, there might be people reading, but do they like it?
Mhm.
Was just kind of always in the back of my mind because I was just looking at other people's works and it was so different. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where all that time went.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it may be it may have come many years later after the fact, but you finally have gotten at least some of the praise that we've been thinking of about your stories for so
Thank
long.
you.
So,
I think it's really a big weakness of mine that I've realized. I put too much validation on stuff like that. Like
mm,
people looked at this, people, commented on this many times, and it's just not a healthy way of posting anything on the internet. It's looking
Yeah.
at stuff like that. I think you should really just be like, you know what, I stand by this, I like it, and if nobody else does, you know what, at least I enjoyed making it, and I'll try again another
mhm.
time.
Okay, very nice. Yeah, it can be a very deadly trap to fall into when you're focusing on the
Hmm.
numbers as opposed to just enjoying
Right.
what you're doing, and
Hmm.
maybe you'll touch somebody, and you ended up doing that to both of us. So, um,
Well, well, hopefully I didn't touch you too hard. Is all
Or in the wrong places. Uh,
right.
my friend, I'm curious. Like, I'm obviously hopeful. This is a good sign you're gonna continue writing. But is that something you're thinking of, or are you gonna wait and see like how response is to the story, that kind of thing? Keep focusing on
I've
the art.
ar- I've already been thinking about what the next chapter or whatever is gonna
yes,
be.
yes,
But what
yes.
exactly that's gonna be, I don't know. I haven't thought that deep because really all my eggs were in in this chapter for what I've thought about.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm intending on continuing this because I like the characters I've built so far. Not to, jerk myself around a little bit too much, but
I mean, there's nothing wrong with liking the characters you created.
right,
If you don't like them, then I'm not entirely sure what you're doing.
true.
Can we
I
talk
really
about
want to.
Devi now and how awesome
Yeah,
she
yeah.
is?
I was
She's great.
curious about your guys' impressions on the new things I've brought to the table in this chapter, to be honest.
Yeah, I had I mean, multiple thoughts on all kinds of different stuff with this.
I
We
want you
keep you
guys to
here all
go.
night.
You guys go ahead
The
Okay.
and talk
first
about whatever.
Yeah, totally, my friend. The first thing I wanted to ask about and kind of point out was like the early chapters, and I'd forgotten this, are third person, and then this
Hmm.
new chapter is first person.
Mhm.
I was wondering like what was behind that shift?
Well, I think it's just going back to me changing as a person and also recognizing I've read a bit of erotic literature, and I just think that first person is really kind of more the way to go because if
Mm,
you look at a lot of really popular erotic literature, like I know a lot of people don't like to think of it, but 50 Shades of Grey, which I
yeah.
begrudgingly read all of, it is in first person, and there's a real reason for that because you're in the headspace of somebody, and then if you get to the physical part, then you can describe through them how they're feeling about that. And I think third person is a little clunky in those aspects.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Hmm. That is really interesting because I even today like your work still holds up magnificently, and when I go back to reread it, I think you pull off the third person perspective in this literotica that we create extremely well. And
Well,
so
I'm glad.
before I go into my actual thoughts about this new chapter I'm so excited for. Uh, when can we expect to see the rest of the story?
You want the exact
I
date and time.
yeah, I don't have an exact timeline, but it's not going to be 3 years from now. It
Good.
The main thing about it is I have a lot of other art projects I'm working on in the background.
Mm.
Like I'm happy that I've gotten so many commissions and all that, but sometimes they really pile up if you don't aren't careful, especially since I
Yeah.
was, sick for a little bit around Thanksgiving, and that really kind of screwed me. But
Mhm.
I'm slowly getting through them, and I think as I'm just like I need a break from this, I'm gonna go back to the story as I'm just thinking about more of it.
Mm. Okay.
Nice. I'll take 2
Right.
years. 2 years, big improvement.
Yeah, yeah, maybe 1.5. No,
Yeah.
it's gonna be like within like a week or two, I would say.
Jeez. Cool.
Oh, that's awesome. That's amazing. I'm so excited to see where else you go with it. Um,
Yeah.
and so I was relating pretty heavily to Sasha as she described her feelings for Chastity before all
Mm,
this, the crazy three-way shenanigans
So
happen.
hot. So great.
And I think you've proven yourself to be a master of capturing the true poetry of this community and its interests. And now you're showing your mastery in capturing our hearts.
oh, that's nice. I I think
Nice.
I'll be honest, it's sad
Yes.
to, be in her viewpoint, but I think most people that have at least had adult relationships have been in like a very exact one or a very similar experience to that.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Definitely. It's and maybe because I'm ridiculously romantic, I felt just as sad as Sasha when finding out Chastity had gotten a new girlfriend in Devi.
Mm.
I was feeling
yeah.
super happy that Sasha and Chastity were finally getting back together after 10 years in the universe of the story, only for that fantasy to come crashing down and burn up on entry. Though I love it all the
Mm.
same in a melancholy sort of way.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm curious where the idea for Devi came from. I know before
Yeah.
you've said to me that you knew you couldn't keep it going with just two characters doing the same thing.
Mhm.
So where did Devi come from?
I th- really what I was messaging you in private before I even wrote all this was I was thinking that conflict makes a great, push of a story. And
Mm.
not that they're necessarily going to be in direct, like, we're fighting each other, but her showing up with a new girlfriend is A, very realistic because it's been 10 years. It's
Yeah.
kind of crazy to hold a candle for someone, even though Sasha is, which kind of kind of shows how much she likes Chastity. But
Yes.
I think the second part of that is just I wanted it to be like a bittersweet moment of I'm finally seeing this girl again, and even though we don't have this relationship, maybe, we can get closer. But then suddenly there's this person, and she seems cool, you know. I think to Sasha at least, she's kind of enjoying her vibe, even though she's not entirely sure what her motivations are
Mhm.
right now. I think
Yeah.
just in her headspace, she's like, this person's pretty nice, even though I don't like her that much because she took Chastity away from me.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I was definitely getting some Blood Money vibes from Devi, like with Elizabeth, though
Oh no,
just a
that
little
bad
bit.
thing.
I love
But
blood money.
I mean, Devi is definitely a much more what's the word? Um, she's she doesn't cross lines really nearly as much as Elizabeth, and um,
Yeah, yeah,
she. But it's still that's a character that I didn't realize I was that type of character that I didn't realize that I truly enjoyed is ones who um, are really pushing the boundaries of what's happening in the story through their own means, whether they're realizing it or not.
right. I I don't know if we're going to get to it at all, but I guess I'll just bring it up that what I've realized in time is that there's a lot of crossover between wedgies and domination, just
Mm-hmm.
that whole
Mhm.
BDSM aspect. And like just thinking about, oh, the most popular one, like a bully and a nerd, like
Yeah.
there's a dominant personality and then there's a submissive personality. And really what Devi and I guess Elizabeth, even though I've heard your opinions on her aren't that high, to be honest,
Blood money's
but
the best.
I like the criticism though. I'll be honest, I really liked hearing it, and I think really a dominant personality can be a lot of different things, but when it comes to if you're a bit more polyamorous, like she is, you want to push the submissive personality into doing things they're uncomfortable with and just to see the reaction and all these things. I don't know if I'm
Mhm.
on the money with that or not,
Yeah.
but that's how I've always and the people that I've met and talked to, that's kind of where it lands.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. And I'm not saying I'm getting those Elizabeth vibes as a bad way. It's because Elizabeth is one of the most memorable characters of any story to me. Um,
Mm,
it's that in your face sexuality that is completely undeniable, I think is really
right.
um I love seeing that, and I wish there was more of it. So keep giving us more, please.
I like
I think.
her
Go ahead.
playfulness, especially. I
Yes.
like, and there's some very subtle things you do when Chastity backs up into her, and you mentioned a backwards hug, and this is before we know about the bra connection wedgie. But if you
Hmm.
look over the story again, you're like, oh wow, that's gonna make the wedgie worse. And like
Mhm.
Right.
everything Debbie does, she's like, I didn't mean to walk in on anything. That
Yeah.
implication that like she's kind of open to things happening right off the bat, and even her description, she has this kind of exotic vibe and a very
Hmm.
cute punky kind of vibe with the ring piercing, and it feels out of place from like the rest of the world that we've seen so far. And even when you mention like that Chastity's parents are not so gay supportive, and I love that hyphenate, and then we see her clearly in this relationship with someone.
Hmm.
But and then when we think back on the characters, we really see that what to me is integral to the community and wedgie fetishists. This idea of domination and submission that go hand in hand with wedgies, or hand in underwear, so to speak.
Yes.
And you play right into that, and I thought that was really wonderful.
I'm good. I think when thinking about Devi, one of my main things that was always in the back of my head that I might get to like doing a flashback or at least them mentioning it is that since Chastity was basically not talking to Sasha because she didn't want to hurt her feelings, that's why they weren't friends anymore. I think that she was probably constantly talking to Debbie about Sasha in this very high light and probably like telling her begrudgingly about what their relationship was back in the
Mm.
day. So I think whenever I was like, "Oh, Debbie walks in," she's like, "Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt anything." She knows, the sexual
Mhm.
tension there and
Yeah.
all that, and that's kind of why she's pushing even harder for this relationship.
Hmm. Okay.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it really is wild to see Chastity be submissive when she was so
Yeah.
dominating and in control with Sasha. Though when you
Mhm.
remember that 10 years have passed in the world of the story, it is completely understandable that she'd be a different person than when we last saw her. And it's depending on how you take the rest of the story, where you go with it from here, it could be a pretty interesting insight into how potentially Devi has affected and changed Chastity for better or worse. That's up for debate. Who knows as of yet? But um, will we find out what actually happened to Sasha and Chastity in their lives over those 10 years as they grew up and grew apart?
Like,
Spoiler alert.
like doing a flashback and maybe, sexy things happen in between. Is that what you're kind of asking?
Sort a little bit of that, but also, I guess, kind of a summary slash run through, what have you, like just a brief history of like once they, I guess that critical impact, and they drift apart, and then how their lives go after, because you get
Mm.
just just a tiny taste, like a grocery store sample of what happens, like way how their lives have progressed. Um, but I want more.
I think that's interesting that you want more because honestly, I think that some people are turned off by flashbacks and all that.
Mm.
I personally don't. I've watched a lot of shows where the flashbacks are way too often, and you're like, okay, well,
Mhm,
there's not even an actual story in the present anymore. But
Oh.
I think it would be interesting to see like a different, like maybe half and half of the story is what Sasha was going through. Maybe she tried to dabble in some sort of relationship, but since she was always interested in Chastity, it just didn't work.
mhm,
Versus like early days of Chastity and Davy, where they're getting into their whole thing. Maybe her admitting her kink to Davy and all that. So,
mhm. Okay. And one of the things I love the most about this new chapter is the very clear changes in viewpoints, between Sasha and Chastity. Um, there was some of that in the original work, but one of the things I love about that, uh, from back then, is how they sort of, I guess, as I said about on "Feeling the Fire Until It Burns" episode, how they sort of blend into each other, as if they're becoming one person. But
oh,
here,
okay.
it is very clear cut who is, who the reader is looking out of the eyes of, and I thought it was fantastic. And was there a reason for you, going after such a clear cut change in view?
Well, I'll be honest. Whenever I heard your guys debating how it kind of blended together, I was like, that's kind of the sign that I didn't exactly know how to write different
Mm,
perspectives like that. Even though I thought it was interesting, I think that's just kind of par for the course of it's always going to have your writer's voice, and you have to at least change a little bit, like language or anything, just their interactions to at least make it obvious who is, doing the thing. Even if you write it out, it's not going to
mhm,
help. But what kind of helped me this time was that they are very different people, and that's what I thought about whenever I was writing, and that's
mhm,
why I did the shift. Whenever I wrote the Sasha part first, then I was like, well, I kind of want it to be from Chastity's perspective because everything is going to happen to her next.
mm.
So that's
Mm.
kind of why I went into the shift there.
Okay. And what I mean by like they sort of blend together slowly is not. I see it more as, I see it as like they're so on the same page. They're on the same wavelength.
Mm,
So, and they keep coming closer and closer.
right.
They're, I guess it sort of feeds into Han's theory that they're dead. Is they're they're
My
they
theory's been blown up. Nicely done.
Oh
Was like,
no,
nah,
I'm
I gotta prove
sorry.
them wrong. Here's a new chapter. They ain't dead. 10 years later.
Yeah,
well,
they
maybe
just
that's
wrote
limbo.
they're dead or something.
But I think that, they, because they're so on the same page with what's going on originally, it's so, they sort of start to feel like this, like they're merging into one being,
Right,
in a very poetic way.
right. And I like that aspect, but I also think what makes stories interesting is if the characters are very different, even if they like each other.
Mm,
Because I
Mm.
think that if you think about any popular character from books, comics, whatever, you don't think of, well, these two characters are very similar. Well, those
Mm.
characters probably aren't going to stand out very well because there's a lot like them. I think
Mm.
just having kind of very different personalities is kind of interesting, I think, to write and to read.
Mhm.
Was
And you
it fun for you though, coming back to this like 10 years later? Because I loved, and it took me a second to totally get it. But when you have the door, walking into the door, and the scene obviously mirroring her falling out of the
Yeah.
tree, I'm like, I feel like Nicely Done's just having some fun with us here. He's like, remember this kind of thing.
Yeah,
Was it
yeah.
fun coming back to it? Or
I
were you like, was it hard?
it definitely wasn't hard because just hearing you guys talk about it, I was kind of remembering the fun I had back then of writing it. And I really like, not doing full flashbacks or whatever, like, oh, she got hit
Yeah.
in the head, and then we flash back to, wow, remember that. More just like subtle
Uh,
things
it was, yeah.
of just that kind of, she gets hit in the head, and oh, look, there's Chastity again,
Yeah.
abandoning her like in a very similar way. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of fun.
It was great.
Yeah, that subtlety, that indirect detail, that is that's what makes you so good to me.
Thank you.
Hopefully you're single. This feels like Nif is trying to.
um, and I agree that's why I write that way, is
Mhm.
that a lot of fiction, whenever people are first starting out that I've read, is that there is no, it's either blunt or nothing, is kind of the
Yes.
the
Mm,
problem, is that they'll be like, okay, this happens, and but you don't know anything in between or before that. It's just there, and you just take it or leave it. Kind of is the problem.
Yeah, and so you said a little earlier ago that you really enjoyed writing these characters, and I remember on the Lucky Fetish thread for Feeling the Fire Until It Burns, when you remembered the story after, I guess, forgetting about it for a year or so, you said that you didn't really care for the characters. So I'm curious
Mm,
how that shift happened and how you were able to find the love that absolutely these characters deserve.
mm. I think just looking back into the headspace of back then is that A, I don't have the best memory, so that doesn't help, and B, I think I was like, I just want to write something new. I don't want to come back to this like cold story that I'm not even sure people enjoy that much anymore. I I don't remember who wrote that. Is it coming back? I don't remember if that was Hans or who that was, but
me. You're
I thought it
welcome.
was
You're
you.
welcome, world.
So
Yeah.
I think even seeing that, I was like, well, this is like one person that's like
Mhm.
asking about it. And
Yeah.
if I just bump this like year-old post, people are gonna be like, what is this? Anyways, I'm
Yeah.
going about to something else. So,
Mhm. Yeah, it was a little bit before I'd actually joined Lucky Fetish, so I was not able
mm.
to respond in time for it to not be considered a ridiculous bump. But it was
Right.
just it was one of it was like the I didn't remember Blood Money as much, um, but I feeling the fire until it burns. It's always from the first time that I read it, it's always stuck in my head. This is what writing should and can be. Why is nobody else doing this?
I think really why people don't do that is it takes a lot more time and a lot more headspace
Mhm.
to do anything like that. So, and whenever people aren't appreciating it, you're just like, well, I just wasted all that time for what,
Mm,
really?
Mhm.
yeah.
And also just not knowing
Right.
also is kind of
Yeah, that's you,
Sure.
there weren't any podcasts for a couple of random guys to just spout how much they love the stories back then. So,
You're welcome
yeah,
again,
that is
world.
true. That is true.
so taking a step away for a minute, can you walk us through your journey with this fetish from how you first discovered it to finding and joining the community up to today?
Sure. So, really in the beginning, I was very young. This isn't like a thing that I think a lot of people are the same way with this.
Yeah.
It's not like you think like suddenly one day I'm like in my 30s or whatever and I just want to enjoy wedgies. I don't
Mhm.
really
Yeah.
know if that happens very much.
No.
So I mean, I was very young. And the weird part, I've talked to other people about this, is that I didn't even enjoy sexuality at all. I literally
Mm,
just enjoyed wedgies. Like I didn't know anything about sex, anything about any of that, but I enjoyed wedgies, which is pretty. I I don't know if the word is hilarious or strange, but that that was like my first sexual thoughts was of wedgies, which is crazy to think about. But
yeah.
and obviously I moved on to actually enjoying women and all that,
Mhm. Yeah.
but um, I mean, early days. I think that's a lot of people, though, in
Yeah.
this community, from what I
Oh yeah.
have ascertained, kind of indirectly. But
Mhm.
yeah, what
Okay.
was your other questions about it? I don't really remember. I'm sorry.
So once you realized that you had this fetish, how did it go then to you finding and joining the online community, and then how has it transitioned into today?
Well, if there are any, younger people here, you might not understand this, but back whenever I was younger, the internet was a much different place.
Yeah.
You couldn't just type in a search bar, "Hey, I want to look for this." It wasn't really that easy. So I was kind of scouring the internet, mostly finding things by myself, which was exhausting. And
Mm,
eventually, I don't even remember how I came across the forum, and I was like, "Wait, other people like this? Besides just me? I
mm,
didn't know."
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's kind of how it happened. Was literally searching things on my prehistoric computer that probably was stealing Wi-Fi from my neighbors, and just randomly probably came across it because the internet was very random back then. It
Yeah.
was very hard to find anything, so that I'm sure that's how it happened.
Okay.
Yeah. Definitely mirrors a lot of our experiences. 100%.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I figured.
Mine included. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna say the way you were describing it nicely is it sounds very similar to how you were how you described to me in the past, Hans.
Yep.
Mm.
And it's how
And
most of us, like I did, you might have seen it, nicely done. I did like a big demographic survey of the community, and most of them were like, yeah, we're super young, like 12, 13,
right.
figuring it out. Yeah, nobody in their 30s is discovering, hey, wedgies? I'm into this. Yeah,
Which
and it's
I
pretty cool.
say that sarcastically,
Yeah,
but I really think that that's changed with the internet, to be
yeah,
honest.
for sure.
Because I have seen people that are like, "Why is this?" Like just on like a post that kind of blew up on
Hmm.
TikTok or whatever, where
Yeah.
there's like a slight wedgie or whatever. They're like, "Why is this attractive?" And I'm
Yeah,
like, and it gets a lot of upvotes, and I'm like, that's strange to think about because I mean, back whenever I was younger, it's not like I was like seeing all these video clips and all this because literally YouTube was just starting,
Hmm.
and it was more of discovering it by yourself through
yeah,
experiences is more what
Yeah.
happened.
totally.
A little bit of an experience project, if you will.
Hmm.
um, yeah, that reminds me of what Jr. said about when I talked with him, um, where we didn't really have much of anything back in the day, and now like getting into this fetish today, where do you even start? There's just
Yeah,
a
so much.
veritable ocean, and there's so
Yeah.
much free content that you can consume, and
Hmm.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
If you want a tip, just go into Twitter and type in wedgie, and I'm sure you'll find a good
That's a good tip.
number.
That's a good tip. Yeah.
From the
Uh,
small amount, I'm not on Twitter that much, but probably on TikTok too. I don't know much about TikTok and algorithms and all that, but definitely on Twitter there is a vast amount of content creators more than back then. So
Yeah.
mhm. Okay. So, and I'm curious because they're really some of my favorite in this community, amongst so many other things about your stories. But what role do you believe titles play in writing? And in a similar vein, how are you so damn good at coming up with perfect titles?
Titles are hard.
Well, I think that unless you have a very clear-cut idea of what you are writing, where you want it to go, and all that, I think writing the title is the last thing you do, always.
Nice.
Probably
Yeah.
even writing the frustrating part about writing something that is ongoing is you can't be like, well, that title sucks now. It's just kind
Yeah.
of there.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
a problem with writing online.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were writing an actual book, I'm sure the title would change like I don't even know how many times.
Mhm.
A
But
lot.
just writing chapter titles, I always do it at the end because of those reasons that it might change. And I'm just thinking, what is the underlying goals of the characters? What is actually happening? Just the overall arching, you know, thing of of that chapter. I don't know if that makes
Mhm.
sense, but
Yeah, it
Absolutely.
does.
that's
Yeah.
kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it does sound pretty similar to how so many people do it, but I actually like to try and figure out what the title will be really early into writing the story because I feel
Mm.
that it informs how the rest of it will go.
And I think that's another way of doing it is doing that way. I think that the age old there's just a blank screen in front of me kind of
Hmm.
it like turns me off from doing that because I'm like, well, I don't even know what's gonna happen later. How what am I gonna write this chapter title about? So
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that is fair.
This approach sounds masochistic to me, having had to title a lot of stories and struggled with every single one of them. It's not easy.
and just what I think I said, what is the title of the newest one? I liked it.
Beneath the surface.
Yeah, and I was kind of doing. I mean, I don't know if you guys liked it or not. You're like, man, he's really lost his lost touch with writing
No.
titles.
It
But
was good, yeah.
I I don't know if you guys got really what I was going for, but it was more of like a double meaning of what's beneath the surface emotionally and what's beneath the surface
Right.
literally of her dress. So
Yeah.
I didn't get it until you said, "Did you get it?" And I was like, "Oh, because of that." And then as soon
Hmm.
as you said, "Did you get it?" I was like, and now I was like, I should have got that way earlier. That's
Yeah.
clever.
Yeah.
I
You
like that one.
absolutely have not lost your magic touch.
that's good.
The titles are still very, very on par with what you were creating
Mhm.
back in the day. So,
I want to ask whenever you guys were reading, I hope I'm not cutting off
no,
like
No,
no,
any
no, no.
please,
future subjects,
please. Yeah.
is that I changed not like I intentionally changed Sasha's character in the way that before she was more of this punk girl kind of and all that, but now that she's grown up, she had to get like an office job. Just the way she dresses is more, professional and you could say nerdy, I guess. And I don't know if you guys enjoyed that. I was gonna go more in depth with that, probably Chastity being like, "Yo, you changed a lot."
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys
I
enjoyed.
I absolutely 100% enjoyed it. It felt so in line with what should happen. Sasha felt extremely like a victim of circumstance in some regards. And I mean, living with such a heavy thing in your brain for 10 years is really gonna take a toll on your mind. So
Right.
it makes complete sense to me how she turned out this way.
Mm,
Carrying the torch is gonna get hot.
Yes,
I'll
yeah.
rephrase it.
you'll feel that
Now
fire.
what I like though is like the thing when I was reading it, and I kind of hinted at this, is like how punky Devi is. And I don't know if
Mhm.
I'm pronouncing it right. Is it Devi? Is that how
It's
you say it?
Davy
Davy.
Ah,
because
So
the
like
only
Davy
reason I
Jones.
know that, and also the kind of the influence is I watched this. Oh, I can't remember the name of it, but this very
Okay.
funny Netflix show about these Indian characters
Yeah.
and how their interpersonal relationships, like just in the family, and also it's kind of a teen kind of comedy. I don't
Nice.
know if this is ringing a bell with any of you, but
no.
I can look it up while you guys are talking or something. But the main thing about it is I like after that, and then also playing Apex Legends, I love Rampart a little bit too much.
Mm,
Okay.
Um, I think I was just like, it would be an interesting, different kind of character than they are, to have a different
Mm.
background, different way of thinking, and all that.
okay.
Yeah, I was thinking Symmetra from Overwatch. I don't know why. I can't
Yeah,
remember if
I
her
love
name's like.
Symmetra, to be
I was
honest.
hearing this. I was like, I feel like this is. I don't know why. I was thinking, but but
Symmetra
sorry, I
vibe.
didn't mean to get us off track. But what I was thinking when I was reading her, I was like, this is like Sasha 10 years ago. Like she
Right.
seems to be the same. She's kind of taken her place, and I thought that was really fascinating. And the romantic part of me was like, yo, like, is are they gonna get back together? And what's gonna happen to Devi? Who's this really
Mhm.
hot, punky girl who was like the Sasha 10 years ago, who doesn't have this like lame desk job getting coffee or whatever. It's like,
Right.
so I'm really curious about how you did that and where you taking it.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I don't know further down the line where their relationship will progress. But I think right now it's more of just a playful, we're going to have fun together kind of
Hmm.
vibe.
Yeah,
Mm,
it touches on that
love it.
magic number that Hans has brought up of three perspectives.
Three's the
So
best. Blood money. 3 characters. Best
hey,
story
hey,
ever.
thank you
Hey.
for that fantastic segue. So at the beginning of Blood Money, you gave this disclaimer. My writing style focuses on story and creating a certain mood rather than just jumping straight into the wedgies. So if you're impatient and are wanting to instantly see wedgies, this probably is not for you. There will be wedgies soon, but I don't like it to be rushed. Just be patient, and in the
Hmm.
next part there will be some. And this is so true for your work, that indirect detail and build up. How did your style develop into this?
Thinking about just erotic literature, not thinking about regular literature. I think that if you just say, "Hey, like these people were having sex or giving wedgies or whatever," like off the bat, no one's gonna care really, because you don't know anything about why this is happening, the relationships between characters, why you should be attracted to the characters at all. So I think that's really where that kind of came from. And also, I did a lot of role playing in my in my younger
Mm,
years, as probably a lot of people in this community did,
Yeah.
and that instilled in me also the fact that having lead up is very important, because again, just dropping, "Hey, I'm like kissing you," well, okay, but I don't really
mhm.
care, to be honest. So
Yeah,
True.
yeah.
Yeah. Well said.
yes. Go moving, and not just writing, as I've called it so many times, jack off content. You creating a legitimately good story that you
Hmm.
can enjoy in the nut and out of it.
I think, like, even if you're reading something to ultimately jerk off to it, I don't think that even at the beginning a lot of people are like jerking off at the intro.
Yeah.
At least a good
True.
Yeah.
literature.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Feeling the fire. Oh, what a title. Oh my God.
Wow. Yeah, that's all it
Because
takes. Yeah.
even if I don't I think my main thing whenever I think about popular erotic literature is 50 Shades of Grey, and I did not enjoy it very much, to be honest, because I didn't think it was written very well, was my main uh
Yeah.
thing. But just thinking about that, even though it is very sexually charged, like later on, I don't even know if in the second chapter if they get into having sex together. I don't remember. It was quite a ways in the first book. So
Sure.
just thinking about that, successful literature, you have to have important, like building character relationships before you care about the sex.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Have you created anything outside of the community?
Nothing I've nothing I've published for sure. Just, and I want to get back to actually writing just fiction in general, but it's kind of hard as an artist. I think every artist has this moment of you're really excited in the beginning, and then you get to this middle bit and it is just you hate everything you've written. You look back at
Mm,
anything, you're like, why is this so dog shit? I don't know what I'm doing.
totally.
Um And if you're by yourself, not posting, just going to be like, what if I get this published one day? You that trap is very difficult unless you're an established writer of being like, I don't know what I'm writing. This is terrible. Nobody's going to like it, and then just giving up. So
Yeah, I know that trap very well.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Once you realize just how deep the hole goes, it's like fuck.
hmm
Now, how do I get out of here?
And I think the problem, I think the most I've written of anything is almost 200 pages on
Wow.
Microsoft Word or whatever. So whatever that translates into.
Yeah.
Um,
A
and
lot.
the trap was I got to a point that I hated how I took the story, but I
Mhm.
had kind of directed the whole story from the very beginning in a way that I was like, this is what's going to happen. But then whenever I got to the moment, it just wasn't like any way I kept rewriting it, it just wasn't working. And I was like, this is going to be so much work to go back. And then I
Yeah.
saw more flaws in the early parts, and that's kind of where that ended.
Yeah. Just gets overwhelming at certain points. So
hmm
Yes.
that's why it's so incredible to see working relationships like the one between you, Hans, and Shadow. Having someone else, even if you're not creating the whole story or creating whatever it is the entire way, just having somebody else to bounce ideas off of or to brainstorm or
Right.
whatever, or just like, hey, can you take a look at this? Tell me what you think. That is so helpful. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of having this online community is that it's so easy to get that if you ask around.
It's
Right.
kind of the ideal, right? It's probably the dream you had nicely when you were starting to role play with people. Like in my experience, when I was just coming up into writing, starting to role play, I would be writing super long paragraphs and I'd be writing all this detail and all this creative stuff. And then they'd be like, I said, ouch. And I would flip out on them. I'll be like, that's all?
Yeah.
Where's the detail? Where's the reactions?
Oh
Where are the
my gosh.
characters thinking and feeling, you know? So when I was starting to write and reading like the work you did, I was like, I can capture all this stuff. I can
hmm
tell you and I can make metaphors and similes and I can do all that stuff because Nicely Done did it and others did it. But I also did not want to be like those role players who just added
Oh
nothing.
gosh.
So I was that. I guess you probably had some of that similar reaction.
Yeah. And sometimes I still dabble into role playing, but I think the main thing is that's just an instant turn off for me, and I just will stop responding to people, which
Yeah.
is kind of mean, but it's just it's so bad to the point where I've role played enough, and I'm like, there's other people in there's other fish in this giant sea of people in this
Yeah.
chat board. I'm not gonna spend any more time with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's entirely fair. You know you'll be able to find something better.
I
Yeah.
hope. It's
Yeah.
the hope.
That's the hope. Yeah. And what Nif is talking about with me, I've written on like long novel length stories with Shell Melder, and it's
Oh,
been super successful. And that's sort of the dream that you want. Like if you're writing with somebody that you're able to bounce ideas and have success stuff. Because I've
nice.
been in that same spot you've been in. I was writing a fantasy story and I had a lot of stuff. And I was like, I really don't like how I wrote this character. I want this character to be redeemed, but I can't do it because of how I wrote it. And I got in that stuck in that. Like, it's gonna be so much work to rewrite it. So I
Right.
know exactly what you're talking about. I feel it, and it hurts me hearing you talk about it because it's like, no, nicely done. I'm so sorry.
I I think really the main takeaway, for me at least, is that you need to outline more whenever you're writing
Mm,
larger lengths of text. Like
yeah,
writing a chapter is okay and not thinking too hard about it, but if you're thinking I'm gonna write like a freaking 300-page fiction novel
yeah,
and you don't have any outline, you're going to reach a point where you say, this is all fucked up. And
Hmm.
there's just no
yeah,
going back. So,
totally.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Hans.
that's a good point.
I think you described it extremely well when you you've brought up um, the interactive stories that you tried to create is scope creep.
Yeah, that's true.
It you don't
That's a part of it
yeah
too.
it takes you by surprise and then you're kind of lost. Is like, what the fuck? Where do I go from here?
Yeah. It's different because, like, when you're writing a story nicely, you spoke on this. It's like you get to a point, and especially if that voice in your head starts doubting,
Hmm.
and it's like, nah, this isn't good. And then you try to write something, and right away that voice is like, nah, this is bad. And you look back trying to edit, and you're like, this is all bad. How is all this so bad? And you just
Mhm.
can't do it. You just can't.
Yeah.
And that lack of confidence is so killer for
And
me. And in interactive stories, it can be different because, yeah, it can quickly
yeah.
get out of hand. Like a normal story can too, but interactive stories is definitely difficult. It's not easy, and sometimes it feels easy when we write. Like, I was it easy? I think we kind of touched on this, but was it? Did it really flow when you wrote this one nicely? This new chapter.
Y- yes, because I had a very clear idea. If you don't have a very clear idea of where you're going, I think so
Yeah.
it would be a lot harder. Like if I was just like sitting down cold turkey, I'm gonna
Mm,
write this, I would have been
yeah.
like, okay, what am I doing? What am I gonna do here? But yeah.
Yeah.
So, taking a sort of a broad look at the community and the fetish as a whole, as someone who's been part of this community for so long, I'm curious what your perspective is on how everything has changed over the years.
I think a lot of it has changed for the better because there's more people giving eyes to things, more content, more very creative people. But it's kind of sad that I've heard people and just people have messaged me and just are like, I don't want to be in this community anymore. I'm done. I just want out. I need to do other things. And it's
Yeah.
kind of sad to me that people tie so much maybe of their thoughts or of just their own sexuality to this community and they just feel trapped. So I don't
Yeah.
think that's changed that much over the years. I think I've just being like having more eyes on what I'm doing. I think people are just bringing this more forth to me.
Hmm. Yeah, and
Yeah. Such a good point.
in a lot of ways, DeviantArt is much more open to interactivity, like actual interactivity between people on the site versus Lucky
Hmm.
Fetish.
Yeah, Lucky Fetch is kind of a dumpster fire. I'm gonna be honest
Yeah.
with both of you.
Oh
It is
yeah.
not the way it used to be. Like I haven't
Yeah.
been on there very much at all over the years, and just coming back to it, I was like, what is
Mm.
what happened here? It's
Yeah.
just all like downhill. It's just there's no love that's been put in. It's literally the same format it's been like since I was very young, which is crazy. So, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just think like I'm
Bonkers.
looking up what it. Yeah, I just think of like the Godfather. Look how they massacred my boy. It's like,
Yes,
it's
it was so
terrible.
sad. I think the saddest part was whenever I was trying to just I was like, I'd like to post it there too because I don't like I think people are a bit turned off by clicking a link. So I was like, I'll post it there and maybe people will like it. It was just not working.
Mhm.
It was
No.
like everything
Yeah.
kept getting screwed up. I couldn't even like delete my post and I
Yep.
was like, this is just I don't
It's
know what's
terrible.
happening. So I'm just done. I
It's a
Yeah.
It
mess. Yeah.
gave me like 200 words and that was it and I had like 2000 or something. I was like, there's no way I'm cutting this up into 200 words per post.
Yeah.
So,
Oh man.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Same thing happened to me with my first stories. It's just like,
Yeah.
why is it so unintuitive? Why can't we just have a good platform that's set aside for us? Like, is that so much to ask?
Too much to ask. It's
Sadly,
too much. Yeah.
the problem is somebody has to be the one behind the scenes doing all this.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I know it was JR that was doing it,
Mhm.
for so long, but I think he's just like, I'm just done. I don't care that much anymore, which I understand, honestly, because there's not really any reward out of managing a website. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
And there's really not a
Totally.
whole lot that he can really do anyway, because it's the software that comes packaged with it. So it's a lot of it is just
right.
entirely out of his hands. He has no control over.
Hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, it would just be a case of, yeah, I've got to make a whole new website, which
Yeah.
That's a very huge undertaking. So
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if in this day and age, I feel like there would be so many critical eyes turned on, and so many voices in the ear of the
right.
person creating it. Like everybody wants
Mhm.
their opinion. No, like it should be done like this. It should be done like that. And it'd certainly be a massive project, but it would be amazing to have.
And I don't really think personally that it matters that much that there isn't that central hub. I mean, it was nice, but there's plenty of other
Really.
websites that are doing basically a very similar thing.
Mm,
So I don't see it as too much of a loss personally because I'm just like
mm.
there's so many different social media platforms now, but it's still a little sad.
That's it. Yeah, that's the first time I'm actually hearing somebody speak from that perspective because I sort of see it as like there's so many different platforms that we're on, you're guaranteed to miss out on some kind of content that you probably would
That
have
is
really
true.
enjoyed.
I think that's the one aspect that that website did really well, as well as stories. I mean, unless you post a deviant art, I don't really know where else you'd go to see that. And it was more of just a concise place to go to find that kind of stuff is really the strength of it.
Mhm.
Sure.
Well, yeah, Hans,
Yeah.
you can very well speak on where else we can go.
I'll take you on a tour nicely after this. We'll go explore the great
Okay.
community and all
All
its
right.
odd niches.
Mm. I'm a little
Yeah.
scared to be honest from what I've seen, but
You should be. At least there's no more experienced projects. Well, there's Wattpad if you want
Yeah.
to go there.
oh my.
Yeah. So, do you have any plans to migrate your catalog over to DA?
You know what? I should probably, but I don't know. It would be a little bit of work. that and you guys like it. You guys like the story. It might be interesting to see if people, fresh eyes on, these older stories.
Hmm.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
maybe.
definitely. I remember like Hans, you when I believe it was on the Lucy and Daniela two-parter episode, where you said like after a while you posted it on a new website. It was getting all this new traction, all this new eyes
Hmm.
on it.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
so
true. Speaking of Wattpad, people are
yeah,
like, continue. Where's the next part? It's like, yo, this story's been done for 6 years, people. 7, 8 years.
yeah,
Like, come on, wake up.
yeah,
That's
DA would
funny.
be a good place for it though. Like even your new chapter, you gotta be pretty happy, right? 10 hours ago you posted or whatever, and it's got like 12 favorites, bunch of
Oh,
views. Must feel kind of good. If you're like me and you're like,
yeah.
I need that external validation. Please help me.
I'm trying not. That is the main
Oh,
thing
it's
that
hard.
I am trying not to do with writing now. I'm just like, if I'm not enjoying it, then I'm not gonna write it. But
Yeah,
I don't. The outside people looking in. I'm trying not to do that with art, but it's a lot harder. But I think
yeah.
just being like, you know what, I'm just gonna write this, and if I like it, that's good.
So
yeah.
lucky to be an artist, though. Everybody loves artists, and wedgie art's the most popular. I say as a writer, though, who has no artistic talent. Like, I see it, I'm like, I'm so jealous. Like, everybody loves you. You get all the comments to the faves. No one likes writing no more.
Well,
Oh, it's more effort.
we have the
Yeah,
dedicated fan base and audience.
Like, I'm not saying that writing doesn't take effort. I'm saying that viewing the content is more effort.
Oh
Like
certainly.
yeah.
You're right.
anyone
Absolutely.
can just be like, "Hey, I like that picture," but like not saying to someone, "Okay, sit down and read this for 30 minutes."
Yeah.
Some people are not gonna do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah. It's
You're right. Absolutely.
you have it all right within a couple seconds of it loading up right in front of you with art, but reading,
Mhm.
especially if you're looking to get something out of what you're reading, or you like me and just goes who loves to just dive and say like emulate English teachers and go way too deeply into stories. Um, it's quite an investment of time to be able to
Right.
do that, and uh, there's probably the vast majority of people are here to uh, just get off, so they're not really worried.
Yeah.
They're not looking
Sure.
to invest all that time. They just want to get out and get in and
Mhm.
get out.
Sure.
Yeah, very true.
So you've been creating visual art really for the community just as long as written art. Like you've
Mhm.
the first thread that you created was for on Lucky Fetish was for your art, and I'm
Mm.
curious how you've maintained that balance over the years between the two. Not getting burnt out on one or both.
I think that I got burned out a lot more on writing than art because I've always really like wanted to get a lot better at art, and I think a lot of people start at a higher level of writing than they are at art because art is just kind of, if you're new to it, it's pretty difficult to just start into. So I think that's why I stuck with art a lot harder, was because I was like, I want to get better at this.
Mhm.
But then
Yeah.
with the writing, I was like, I'm at least a little bit more comfortable writing. And
Yeah.
I mean, teachers saying, "Oh, you're such a good writer. You should do this." Blah blah blah. And
Nice.
I was just kind of like, "Well, I want to improve my art." So
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, legitimately, your writing is just as much works of art as the traditional art that you create.
oh, thank you.
So, which do you feel is more rewarding then, or are they equal?
Um, hmm, I'd say it depends on the mood, really.
Mhm.
I felt rewarded just writing this, but I mean, it might get to a point where I'm like, I don't have a lot of motivation. It's been a while since I've written. But meanwhile, if I slap up some commission that I did, people are just gonna flock to it, and then I'm like that that outside validation that we've been talking about, which
Yeah.
I am still trying to get away from. I'll be like, well, I mean, if I post more of that, then more things will happen down the line,
Yeah.
whether than rather than the writing,
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you consume any content?
like other wedgie content creators,
Yeah.
writing or art or
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, let me just go to my my TV note because there's definitely a lot of people that I look at and like I don't want to directly steal what you've done, but I kind of do at the same time. Um, um, I don't know how to really pronounce this guy's name, Jahuka.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, he's great.
I
One of the
really
best.
enjoy his art,
Yeah. Now
Yeah.
and
known as
he's, I mean,
Nicolfos.
yeah, what the, no, I'm
What
not gonna
I
weird
get
don't
name
know.
into what
change.
happened
I
there,
don't know.
but I think they're like huge compared to me. Um,
Okay.
and I just look up to just their style and how effortlessly they draw a lot of poses and expressions. So,
They're
Yeah.
great.
Absolutely. Juka really is one of the best artists in this community, in my opinion.
hmm
Him and the Killer WC, top two right there, top tier all the way.
oh, right. Yeah, I follow some other artists that are like only like 1,000 people look at them. I'm just looking over my list. And honestly, a lot of the artists I looked up to aren't necessarily wedgie artists, I'll be honest with
Mhm.
you.
Sure.
Like they just do basic like either nudes or actual sex
Mm.
on
Yeah.
Twitter. A lot of times I look at people like that and I'm like, these people are so good at what they do. And
Mhm.
there's so many people watching them that I'm both jealous and also like, wow, that's amazing. I wanna do something like that.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that you'd like to see more of in the community?
Mm. That's tough. I think what I would like to see, this is kind of like a vague idea, is being more comfortable with yourself, to be honest.
Mhm.
Like, I think in I haven't really been involved in any other kink like websites or that delving that deep into them, but I feel like there's definitely this underlying thing of I need to stop this. I need to just focus my attention anywhere else but this. And I don't think that's. I mean, that can be healthy if it's way too much, but just having an interest is not a sexual interest. Is not that bad or bad at all, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I don't think there's anything to feel ashamed about or anything with having this fetish.
Right.
It's
Yeah, it's
And I guess
beautiful.
it's pretty.
if we're talking about writing, what I'd like to see is more things kind of like what I write, to be honest, because
Yeah.
then I'd
I
definitely
agree.
read it.
I agree.
But
Yeah. Okay. So, and what about anything you like to see less of? Any trends
less
or
of.
anything like that?
Hmm. I think a lot of poses and things are so overdone, at least in artwork, and just ideas of like. I mean, I think atomic wedgies are kind of the staple, but sometimes if that's all you're doing, it's a little boring, and that's all you're writing about or whatever. And the same can be said with just basic wedgies or whatever. I don't think that interests me that much, to be honest, anymore. So
Hmm.
probably less of that, to be honest.
Yeah.
More interesting, dynamic ideas instead of just the same. Well, they're getting a wedgie now. Okay,
Yeah. You want to see more variety. Yeah, it's just
right.
you can very
I
easily
mean,
get
how many? Go ahead.
you can very easily get tired of seeing the same thing. It's like if you were to eat your
Right.
favorite food for a month, you'd get so sick
Yeah.
that you'd hate it after that month.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not saying that just basic wedgies, like that's kind of the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, but if you just look at just actual real life content creators, just basic wedgies can be a lot different given the dynamic of the person giving it and getting it.
Hmm.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's
Totally.
there's so much you can do. Like I think JR's Patreon is one of the best examples of it. Of like how varied they are with all of they probably the closest I can think of to anyone pleasing everybody.
Nicely. Are you gonna give us some art of the characters in this story? Feeling like
I
Fire
was
Tail Burns, or do I have to commission you to get them? So I want them.
I'm gonna say you gotta commission me. No, I'm just
Oh,
kidding.
oh, all right, all right.
I'm
Open the
just kidding.
queue.
I'm just kidding. No, I was thinking about it honestly, but the problem is I really like this comic that I've kind of taken a step back from just because of being busy.
Hmm.
Um, that I was creating. I don't know if you guys looked at it at all, but it was between two friends, and then one of the friends has a boyfriend, which is also a dominant personality. And I liked where I was going with that. I had a lot of ideas. So balancing that and making more original artwork for myself is a little difficult.
Mhm.
Sure.
Yeah, that's something that it seems to be a kind of a common thing where people tend to take on so many projects at once, and then you're spreading yourself too thin with
Right.
your skill and your ideas. So
Hmm.
I think something a good practice to do sometimes at least is to just wholly focus on one thing and
Right.
get through that and then move on to the next thing. It can be extremely helpful.
And and I really need to get better about just being like, I want to just do this solo project instead of being like, well, these people are probably like, where the hell is my art? Um,
Yeah.
so,
True.
and that's what I did with writing because I mean, I have a lot of commissions, not a lot, but I have some commissions, on back order right now. And there was always that thought of, well, I should be doing this instead. But
Hmm.
then I was like, well, I'm doing this for myself. And a lot of even really big artists and things that do commissions are like, if you get a commission, you have to understand that I have my own personal projects that I want to do in the meantime.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's probably something I should, at least outline on my profile or something. But
Yeah, it's not exactly the most reasonable of expectations to think that that
right,
creators will just drop everything and
you would be
rush to create it.
surprised. You would really be surprised by some of the people that, you know,
Jeez.
it's kind of this whole of, well, he paid for it, and now he's being way too insistent.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So,
Totally.
Hmm. I guess
How
that
busy are you now with projects? Can we tell people like go commission Nicely Done, or are you like no, please, I need a
no,
break?
you could. I'm always open to it. It's just I tell people if they're like there's a lot in front of them, but there's honestly not. I got through a ton of them because I was doing the YCH your character here things,
Yeah.
which I really like doing them because I think people are attracted to them for one thing, and
Mhm.
also it's just something very fast to do where you just get to do all these different characters instead of being like, well, this is such a huge commission with all these characters and all these things. So I've been enjoying doing those.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah. And I'm curious then about that, going from just posting it as posting whatever you create as a hobby and just doing it for fun. What was that transition and shift like into actually making money and accepting commissions?
Like my mindset or
All of
like
it.
how did I do it?
All of it.
Well, the mindset was whenever you're young, I mean, what am I gonna say to family about why I need a PayPal or bank account or whatever the heck? I don't know how people did it back then, but so as I got older, I was like, okay, I mean, it would be great to, there's enough people looking at my artwork and people actually asking me, hey, are you gonna do this? And I was like, you know what? At this point in my life, I could definitely undertake this. So that's
Mhm.
kind of where that came from.
Okay. So you sort of had the desire to
Hmm.
uh, be I guess a full fledged creator in some senses
And
for
I
a
think
while.
even whenever you're just starting out, I think everyone's like, "Oh man, that'd be so cool." Like I think even whenever I first started and I was actual shit at doing art, I'm pretty sure people were still like, "Can you draw this? I would pay you." And I was like, "Really?" But no, though.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah, my forgot to turn off my alarm on my phone, so that was
no
fun.
worries.
Hope that wasn't too
No,
jarring.
I didn't hear anything.
Didn't hear
Okay,
it.
okay, good. Um, what even look like beyond the, I guess in the community outside of it, what has inspired and influenced you?
It's a good question. I think sadly, being a writer, I think I consume a lot more television and movies.
Mhm.
Um, and just and I don't think that's a necessarily a terrible thing, to be honest. As
It's
long as
not.
you're not just doom scrolling through social media, I think it's a lot better. So, but um, I think what has really influenced me is watching things where there are interesting character relationships that are exactly the traditional kind of relationships and seeing where that progresses. I really like series because of that, because you can be like, well, this character is one thing I thought and now they're progressing into something completely different.
Okay, awesome. What do you have any recommendations for people to check some things out?
Hmm. I've been consuming really trash stuff recently. I was watching Lego Masters today,
Oh
so
Oh,
that's
wow,
not
nice.
exactly
Fun.
inspirational, to be
Uh,
honest. But
it can be. You
Sure.
never
you know
know.
what? Yeah, if you want to create Legos, hell yeah, it's great. I
Yeah.
love it. Will Arnett is hilarious. Um,
Nice.
but I think thinking about recommendations for people. Oh, what is that called? The Sinner. I loved that
Oh,
Netflix
okay.
series.
Yep.
Um, because he, first of all, is definitely not a traditional kind of character. He's so awkward. He's
Mhm.
terrible at relationships. And even though well, now he's a retired cop, he's always trying to push the boundary of what he can do, which often gets him in trouble.
Mm,
And I think he's a very interesting character, and especially that they have a lot of other interesting side characters on that show, which really help to, show off his personality and theirs. So
mhm. Some nice foils
Nice.
going on.
yeah, it's one of those shows. I really like how it's set up because it's a mystery, but there's other things going on besides the mystery a lot of times, and you're like, what is
Nice.
happening? There's way too much happening, but also I love that there's a lot happening. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's
Awesome.
been my most recent really enjoyment of media. But thinking of literature, if you want something of that, um, the the most recent thing I listened to was H.P. Lovecraft, actually,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I'd never read him before, and I mean I've heard bad things. Obviously, there's some undertones. However, the two I read, there was one about some um, town getting like attacked by these weird things, and then
Yeah,
another one, the
the town
most
of
recent
Rainsmith.
one. Yes, and then the most recent one I read was there's this dude in this village where he has this wife that is very sketchy, and it's just from this guy's perspective of what is happening to my best friend. He's like being corrupted by this woman. So
Hmm.
yeah, but that is obviously very old style of writing, but I think you can
Yeah.
still think about, hey, these relationships are interesting. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I have the full collection of his works. Is like he's
oh.
a fantastic writer. Like at the Mountains of Madness, if you like H.P. Lovecraft, that's my favorite one by him.
That's the one I read. I
Yeah.
Yeah.
probably did a really bad job of. I was trying not to spoil anything, to be honest. But
Yeah.
that one was my favorite by
S-
far
uh,
from what I've read
Nice.
so far.
Let's see here. Whoops, I didn't want to look up that. I'm looking something up of let's see when it came out.
You're fine. Oh, and I just thought of the Indian comedy teen show from Netflix, by the way, if any of you. It's very funny. It's called Never Have I Ever.
Mm,
Oh, okay. I've heard of that
Yes,
one. Yep.
yes. It's very.
yeah. Okay.
Nice.
Yeah. Well.
It's one of very few Netflix original shows that is actually continuously good throughout the seasons. So
Mhm.
it's very
Nice.
good.
Okay. Yeah. It's. I think you'll be all right with without a spoiler warning for a story that's been out since the early
That's true.
1930s.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I think you're okay with that.
yeah. That is very true. I think I've seen memes about that. He's like, he's ruining the Titanic. It's like,
Yeah.
uh,
Okay. Do you have a message you'd like to send out to the community nicely?
just in general, or what would you like from me?
However you however you interpret the
Whatever I'm
question.
thinking in
Yeah.
general.
Whatever. Tell us
It's
something.
your message.
Pass the
Well,
wisdom on.
I think really what I'm always interested in is what people want to see more of, because I know
Mhm.
that people's perspectives are very different than mine. So just thinking of art, writing, whatever, like what would people want to see more of, like situations, characters, all that, because there's a lot of very tired characters in this community.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what people would want to see in that regard.
More feeling the fire until it burns.
Blood Money Part 2.
ASAP.
More Blood Money.
Bloody your
I don't
money.
think that one can come back, to be honest, but
Oh.
Yeah, that was you tied everything up basically. There's really no loose
in a
ends
very awkward way, but it did happen.
to Yeah.
You guys were talking about how you didn't like how Elizabeth just got with some random guy. And while I agree, I think it kind of also fits into the narrative of, oh, she's just doing all this shit to her sister because she wants to, and then
Mm,
whenever her
I like that.
sister she can't use her sister anymore, she's just like, all right, I'm just gonna go into somebody else. So she's a bit of
Nice.
a user,
Well,
I think.
Big
with
time.
that, what I got out of it was that when we actually see Elizabeth having sexual relations with a partner, she's the
Right.
one who like she's the complete opposite of how she is with Casey,
Yes.
and so I took that as she's only like this with Casey because that for
Hmm.
two things that she doesn't want to lose that sisterly bond, and also she can't she's not getting what she wants from anywhere else, and so she has to be the one to do it.
Right. That makes sense. And I honestly, that's kind of realistic from what I've seen in dynamics like that, where there can be a person where they are just completely different around different people,
Mm.
sexually at least,
Oh
in the
yeah.
dynamic where it's like, well, or even just not even sexually, just like in the real world, they're like this power boss bitching at everybody at their job, and
Yeah,
then behind closed doors, they're getting tied up in like every which way. So
sure.
Yeah, it's one of the most fascinating things about humanity to me is how that shift from
mhm.
how people like that it's almost universally the case that people are kind of a 180 of who they are, uh,
Yeah. Well, it's
depending
kind
on.
of the psychology of, well, I get this all the time. This is kind of sexy that suddenly it's not the way it always
Mm,
is for me in real life. So
nice.
I could definitely I could see a lot of.
We can see that with Chastity too, right? She's this big doctor of something, which I like. We don't even know what she's a doctor of yet, right? But she's
Yeah.
got this prominent position. She's got the millionaire parents. She's got it all right. But with Debbie Davies, sorry, she has someone who can put her in her place and like bring
Right.
her down and break her in some pretty extreme
Yeah,
ways, which is interesting.
yeah,
And there were two reasons I wrote it that way. One, because I wasn't sure what kind of doctor I wanted her to be. But honestly, the biggest reason why I didn't think about it too hard was because it was from Sasha's perspective. She has no idea.
Mm,
yeah.
certainly. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I like that. Damn it,
Yeah.
I forgot what my thought was. Well, do either of you have anything else you'd like to discuss? I'm at the end of my notes.
This has been great. I've had such a great time chatting with you, my friend. We've talked a couple times over the years. You did that amazing teacher wedgie fight art for me. I'm definitely gonna commission
That's
you some
right.
more. But I'm glad we got a chance to chat here and we were talk so openly. It's been wonderful for me.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun coming on.
Yeah.
I was I don't. I mean, no one's gonna know from my voice. That's kind of why I didn't hide my voice because I'm not out there with my voice in anything. But I was hesitant at first because I think growing up more and more, I think I'm getting more used to having open conversations about sexuality. But definitely, whenever I was younger, I
Yeah.
was like, I literally don't. If anybody knew about this, I'd just die like on the
Yeah.
spot or something. So
Yeah.
it's
You're
just,
not
and
alone in
I
that.
think just people are changing too. So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
that.
It's just,
Nice.
we're more and more we're coming into a very open and accepting world
Right.
for like especially like this when you step back for just a second and you think about it to any length, this is such a vanilla thing to be into, and there's really
Yeah.
nothing
Yes.
wild about it whatsoever. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of the insecurity and anxiety that we get that comes from this fetish is unfounded, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's just kind of self-inflicted.
Okay, very nice. Do either of you have anything you'd like to promote?
Nicely done. Go read his stories. Go look at art. Go watch him and go commission them. Let's flood his inbox with commissions, my friends.
That would be nice. But I think what I'd want to promote is just the next chapter, whatever, whenever I do that soon-ish. And I'm planning on doing more Your Character Here's, which I think is great because it's not very expensive, because I can not charge very much because it doesn't take as much time. So,
Mm,
and I think it's fun because people that are like, this is way too daunting to commission all this. It's
yeah.
kind of more of a gentle ease into it.
Huh.
Nice.
I had no idea that that's what YCH stood for. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I first saw it, I was like, I don't like using acronyms too much because of that, but I think that's kind of a more well-known thing in the art world now. So,
Mm,
Okay. I did remember what I was going to say, as I'm hoping in future chapters of Feeling the Fire that we see a little bit more of Chastity return to form, uh, in their sexual
For being
encounters.
dominant.
Yes, I'd love to see some of that come out, but it is.
And like the one thing I have thought about is the dynamic of what's going to happen like later on whenever it's not just suddenly like, hey, like welcome into our little dating circle. What is going to happen? Really, I think what's going to be interesting is more them Davey being like, all right, well, you can give me a wedgie now, and how that what's the reaction and how that's all going to happen. To be
Nice.
honest.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
That'll be
However
great.
you take it, Hans and I will be right there. So excited!
And
Can't wait.
before we end, I think the main thing that I'm always concerned about is making my stories too sexual. So do I go on a nice line of it along with the wedgies, or is it too much, or what is the consensus on that?
I mean, I've
You played
always,
it pretty soft in this
yeah.
one. Just talking about juices flowing. I was like, oh man, I'm getting thirsty. But I thought that was fine. You can stick to that, and I'm always gonna be with you on it. Like, I
Okay.
think there is a point for readers, and as a writer, this is probably maybe more my personal preference, but I've tried to err on being a bit more subtle and not too explicit with it.
Okay.
Because I think that same part of us that when we were young was like just into wedgies. It's kind of like, for some of us, that's kind of still the way where we're like, well, we don't
Okay.
need like the dicks coming out. We don't want all that stuff. We
Yeah.
don't want like all the
Yeah.
super explicit language around
Mm.
what's happening, being poetic and creative. I wonder how much is that's part of your voice too in general and things. But I like how you're doing it. I would try and keep it in that
Okay.
vein. Uh,
Right.
Yeah. I'd say that as long as I've been reading what you've created, I think you've always struck a really good balance between the two.
Okay. Yeah, because that's always, I think, at the bit in the back of my mind, like this is a this is like a wedgie forum or wherever I'm posting it, like mostly
yeah.
wedgie content. And then if I'm just suddenly like, hey, she just like came or whatever, I don't want it to suddenly be like, what? What do we?
Yeah.
What just happened?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
but I'm glad
Yeah.
because
No, you do
me
a good job on it.
personally, as much as I enjoy wedgies, I think it gets to a point where in a scene something else, at least for me, has to be introduced for it to be interesting. Like there can only be so much, I'm tugging on her underwear or whatever
Yeah.
before it's like, okay, but like what else is happening at the same time?
Sure.
So underneath the surface.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Oh, yeah. That's. I like that. Well, sadly, a truly out of this world discussion with Hans Gutherson and Nicely Done has now come to a close. If Hans and I haven't made it clear enough to all of you listening yet from the Feeling the Fire and Blood Money episodes, and now this one, along with all our random snippets of praise, Nicely Done's catalog is an absolute must read. Thank you so much to the both of you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun, honestly.
I'm so glad we got to chat.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so I always look forward to these. If there is anything that you'd like to hear me discuss, or if you'd like to come on for an episode, leave a comment or send me a message on DeviantArt or Lucky Fetish as Nufatora. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club.